Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to Uncivil Law. Thank you very much for joining me. We are joined by a special guest today, Vinnie Politan of CourtTV. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion. From medieval scaffold side spectacles to 24/7 digital streams, public appetite for courtroom drama has barely waned. Only delivery systems have morphed. Crowds once flocked to hangings for punishment as pageant in medieval Europe. By the 1990s, the O.J. Simpson trial, televised circus, triggered a camera backlash among many judges that worried a replaying of that frenzy. Yet demand, of course, keeps growing. Court TV itself was resurrected in 2019 to meet the demand. Today, 49 states allow some form of camera access while the federal judiciary still resists. True crime podcasts, meanwhile, have tripled their audiences in the last 5 years, and channels like Law and Crime notch millions of YouTube subscribers. Scholarly reviews of pilot programs in Florida and elsewhere find little hard evidence that cameras prejudice trials, but they do raise a classic observer effect question about whether being watched subtly alters behavior. Meanwhile, pandemic era remote hearing tech creates new transparency tools, but new headaches alike. Against that backdrop, the questions I aim to ask will spark a relaxed, forward-looking conversation with Vinnie Politan on how legacy broadcasters and indie creators together can serve justice and audiences. Thank you for joining me, sir.
That was very dramatic.
Very dramatic.
And very accurate. The O.J. Simpson case did cause backlash. But what happened in that case? It wasn't the cameras. It was the judge. The judge lost control of the lawyers in the courtroom. And that's what happened. It had nothing to do with cameras. It had everything to do with the judge not keeping order in the court, which is their first job. So that's what I would say to that. And I would also say that cameras don't change behavior. They just expose behavior.
That's a fair point. So I want to start with a little bit of background about you. So why don't you give us the 30-second bio, about a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So growing up, I always had some form of a camera or a microphone around me, whether it was recording my fake radio show on my cassette deck or making Super 8 movies or getting my first video camera in high school. I was always doing this, right? In college, I studied communication. I worked at the radio station. This was my life. But there was another part of my life, which was my father and my brother, the two most influential people in my life. And my father was a lawyer, then a federal judge. My brother was a lawyer, and they were in this private club that I was not a member of. So after college and studying all that, I took a year, worked in TV, and then I went to law school. And, going to law school to me was exciting. It was grueling at first, and then it got better the last year and a half. But then I became a member of the club, and I loved trying cases as a prosecutor, which is what I was. But then I went from prosecutor to private practice. And in the private practice, you became a slave to the timesheet.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, there was no satisfaction. What did I do today? I filled out a timesheet. I billed clients. I did some work, but I didn't feel like I accomplished anything. And then one day I'm at home and I hear a voice in the other room, and it's the television. And I listen close. Wait a minute. I recognize that voice. I go in the other room and I look. It's World News Tonight. Peter Jennings is the anchor, but the reporter is Juju Chang. Juju Chang and I were friends in college. We both worked at the radio station. We were both communication majors, and we talked about our plans for the future. And at that moment, and this is about 10 years after college, she did it. Like, she did it. And I was like, you know what? That was a moment for me. I said, you know what? I am going to do what I dreamed and thought about all along, which was, pursue a career in television. So that was the crystallizing moment. I made the change. I took a 90% pay cut and I worked myself way back up, but quickly within 4 years made my way to Court TV. And it's been what I say is I haven't worked a day since.
Hey, well, that's not a bad deal, man.
Yeah.
When did you first go over to Court TV?
It was right after the turn of the century. It was like 2001.
Yeah, that's cool. So a long career in, I suppose, two very different fields. So you've had two careers. Not so bad.
Yeah, well, three, because in college and during law school, I also had a record label.
Oh yeah, what was that about?
Dance music. I was a DJ also, so it was another love of mine. But what I realized with the world, I wanted to perform, and I didn't want to be behind the scenes, just selling vinyl. So I did that. It was fun. It was exciting. I still DJ on the side a little bit here and there, but got out of the music business because I would not be 1000% happy unless I was the person on stage, and I can't sing. You know how I know I can't sing? Because my mother, who loved me more than anyone, told me, don't ever sing in public.
Fair enough. Well, Court TV itself, as some may or may not know, was off the air, I believe, for almost a decade.
No, a little less, a little less. Well,
at relaunching it, yeah, depends what we're counting from and to.
Yeah, because
Sure.
Court TV was rebranded as In Session, which was really Court TV. And we were part of the Turner family, so we had a very close incestuous relationship with HLN. So I count all those years as Court TV years, even though the intellectual property and the name wasn't being used. It was the same people, the same staff, the same everything. So technically, you're correct, but
That's
I would
kind of
say,
correct.
Right. But doing what we do with some of the people that were doing it, who are still doing it now. There's a handful of us. I would say it was the middle of the Jodi Arias trial when we went off the air, and then we came back in 2019. So
was there any differences when New Day One emerged as Court TV under its own banner?
Yeah,
what was that like?
It was great. It was great. Two things are different. Like, our parent company was different. Our parent company was Kate's Broadcasting, which was bought and owned by EW Scripps. And the difference is our ownership loves what we do. They believe in what we do. Our old ownership debranded us, which was Turner, and took us off the air because they thought they could get more viewers with with True TV. Which there's a great show on True TV. It's those Impractical Jokers. Have you seen those guys?
When I used to have TV, sure.
Yeah, well, those guys, that's Court TV's channel that was taken over by the Impractical Jokers.
I did not know that. Great. That's hilarious.
But when Court TV was on there,
there's something very rich about that. Impractical Jokers on Court TV. That's rich.
Indeed. But so we were a top 20 cable network when Court TV was there. And then when we were replaced by True TV, we became a top 60 cable network. So they lost a lot of viewers, is what I'm saying. So at the end of the day, our ownership loves us. Our ownership believes in us, which is the great part. What is different is the world we live in. And I think you said, like, when I used to have TV, the world is so different now, and Court TV has adapted to that. We are a digital broadcast station. We are distributed in about 40 to 50% of the cable carriers out there. We're on satellite. We're on streaming. We have an app that you can watch us on. If you buy a Samsung television, we're built into Samsung Plus. So the thing is, as you know, the audience is in so many different places. The original Court TV, the audience was on cable. That they had cable, and we were there. Then now the audience is everywhere. So Court TV with EW Scripps behind us has placed us everywhere, and that's another big difference that we have.
Well, I think that's really very interesting as well. I'd like to pick your brain a little bit about, let's go even further back. I'd like to go back to how things have changed since, say, mid second millennia, 1500s, give or take, medieval Europe. My view is that in circa 1500s Europe, Europeans are illiterate, poor. the printing press is still busy being invented. Attending a public trial and execution was often the big show in town. So do you think today's live stream obsession is the same impulse, just with Wi-Fi, or do you think it's different?
It really varies from trial to trial. I think it really does. What brings an audience to a particular trial, and how does that audience find it? What makes a trial big? From my perspective, you said that 49 of the 50 states allow cameras in some form, which is true. But in reality, it's less than half that really give us that full access. And I think that's a shame, because something that happens, and my father, who was a federal judge, used to make sort of tongue-in-cheek make fun of other judges, because other judges would act like they were anointed by God and placed on the bench. And my father knew how he got on the bench. It's a political process. You got to know somebody, and that's how it works, right? In places where judges aren't elected, right? We do have some elected judges in some states. But it's the same thing. Like, there's this feeling like, oh, this is a courtroom. The public cameras can't be in here. We can't allow the public to see it. Wait a minute. You are just a branch of government. We are entitled to as much transparency in those courtrooms as transparency with the legislative branch, the executive branch. There's no secret courtrooms in this country. There's no secret justice. There is public justice. There's open justice. And in the criminal cases that we cover, it's not the prosecution against the defense. It's the people of the state or the people of the Commonwealth. I mean, everyone is entitled to see their government at work, and the people who work for the government, like the prosecutors, like the judge, like the public defenders. I mean, my goodness, we should be able to see justice dispensed to keep the system honest. And I think where you have more transparency, you have more trust in the government. That's my position, right? But that's not necessarily why some people watch some trials, right? We're in the middle of Karen Reed. We know that this case has caught fire because of a guy named Turtle Boy. And he lit a fire, and it has spread everywhere. And I thank him for that, because I want people watching trials. Yeah, it's great for me. It's great for ratings. It's great for CourtTV. But ultimately, I think it's great for our entire society that people understand what's happening inside courtrooms to keep them honest. And it also makes people more educated when they get that get that little note in the mail that it's your turn to be a juror. I don't want jurors who are oblivious to how all this works, because then you end up with what happened in the first Karen Reed trial, where the jury didn't understand. You could tell the judge, hey, we reached a verdict on counts 1 and 3, right? But we don't tell them enough, and they don't know enough going in. But if they are a little more interested in how justice works, then when they become a juror, they'll be a little bit better as jurors, I believe, because they'll be a little bit smarter and understand what's really going on inside that courtroom.
Very, very cool. And talking a little bit about, fractured audiences and how audience is fractured, I think comparing, once again, sort of to the medieval Europe example is sort of interesting, because, the printing press is still being invented, and everyone's illiterate anyway. And no one can go anywhere because, no one has the means of travel. So basically, the entertainment is the theater and the courtroom. So everyone knows what's happening because it's all that anyone can talk about. I mean, talk about the non-fractured public. There's nowhere there to be fractured to. But, over time, of course, it becomes more fractured, with the invent of radio and with the invent of TV and the invent of internet and all the rest of it. So it's becoming more and more fractured. So do you think in today's age of these instant clips, instant TikTok, do you think scale and reach makes today's coverage different? Or do you think, as I think, that it's in some ways, it's kind of the same thing that's always been, just in different clothing?
No, I think there is some difference. What's interesting, and what I call the Johnny Depp trial, the first TikTok trial, Johnny Depp, Amber Heard. And that was one where I think a large portion of society consumed that trial in clips and things that were put onto TikTok. But there were a ton that were watching the gavel to gavel coverage that was streaming everywhere through court TV cameras that were in that Virginia courtroom. And Virginia is not a state that has a history of being camera friendly. It was court TV that was able to bring that to everyone. And I think Johnny Depp wanted the world to see it. That was the whole point of his
100%. I continue to this day that if the cameras were not in that courtroom, there's no way the public sentiment regarding that trial would be what it is. She would have been able to spin that with conventional media. The only reason is that we could all see it, that it didn't work.
Exactly. And that was the difference, because Johnny Depp had two trials. He had the one over in the UK, which was different parties, but it was the same concept, right? It was the same issues, the same sort of testimony. And there you had one grouchy old judge who had a crush on him
and less friendly laws on libel law, but he won here with the harder to win law and lost there with the easier. So it's backwards of your expectation.
Absolutely. And the way the public consumed that trial was much different. It was someone coming out of court and telling you what happened instead of you seeing what happened. And it's a much different experience, because a case like that is all about credibility. And each individual has their own ways to judge credibility. What I found fascinating in Johnny Depp was that, and it doesn't always work this way, but the overwhelming public sentiment was on Johnny Depp's side. And I was wondering if the jury inside the courtroom was watching the same trial. It turned out they were. Now, it wasn't that way in the, I hate saying her name, but I will, so there's no confusion, in the Casey Anthony trial. The public watched one trial and the jury saw a completely different case, and it didn't work out. Now I'm very curious with Karen Read, because it's like an 80-20 split. I think generally you could say about 80% of the public free Karen Read, 20% she's a horrific woman and justice for John O'Keefe, and they believe she's guilty. But I'm wondering if the jury is watching the same trial that the public is watching here, and we won't know until they deliberate. But to me, that's
I don't think they were watching the same. They weren't watching the same trial the first time around, at least in my view, because I thought that was abundantly clear. I've commented that if I were the judge, after the ubiquitous motion by the defense for that directed verdict at the end of the state's case, it's like, I would have thought about it. It's like, I would have thought about it, because that was in such disaster fuel. I was like, I don't know, man, maybe this is that time I should pull that trigger.
Yeah. I think second time around, Hank Brennan has streamlined the case. Obviously, it's moving much quicker.
Yes.
Has left out witnesses who were redundant and unnecessary, and is focused on the elements of the crime, and has tried to steer the jury to the timeline. And I think he's been effective in that. Now, whether or not the jury buys the timeline and the digital evidence is that's the big question. But that's where he wants their focus. And I find in this retrial, we're talking a lot more right now about digital evidence and timeline, which is what Hank Brennan set up in his opening statement. So the trial is proceeding, I think, the way he wants it to. But the unknown question is, will the jury buy that evidence? And will they believe that evidence? Is it enough to push him over the top beyond a reasonable doubt? We won't know until the jury tells us one way or the other. But that has made it much different. The first trial was very defensive prosecution, and there was a lot more focus on the allegations of this conspiracy and this fight. And that's not what's going on right now. That's not happening. Now,
I think the defense is wiser for the strategy, that, as far as I can tell. And it's interesting because Brennan didn't call Proctor, which, I mean, there's massive liabilities there. It's like, I don't have to explain that. But unfortunately, it's like, I think the defense is going to call him. And it seems like that's a strategic mistake by the prosecution. So I don't know what they're doing, but okay.
Yeah, I'm kind of caught on that one. Like, you technically don't need him to prove all the crime. It doesn't look great because of the arguments the defense can make.
Yeah,
but prosecutors,
it's the old idea of drawing the sting is basically the counter, right? It's like, if I call him as my witness, in the prosecution case, let's say I call him in the sort of the middle of my case, in sort of the sandwich period. I call him, I get out all the bad stuff. I can do it softer. I can make the landing a little softer, but I get out all the bad stuff. I get out in front of it. I don't give the defense really anywhere to go. I gain some credibility. I sandwich it in some other good stuff and kind of hope the jury forgets about the whole thing. by giving it to the defense, they're going to make it as painful as possible and make it, highlight it. So I feel like on balance, it's a strategic error, but you're the prosecutor. You tell me.
Well, I was really leaning towards not calling him and let them call him, because then they've got to ask him open-ended questions. I don't know where Proctor is these days. He's been fired, so I don't know if he harbors any ill will towards the state, but he probably harbors more ill will towards Karen Reed and the defense, because everything that's happened cost him his job and his career, because it was exposed. I mean, he did what he did. Like, the stuff wasn't made up, but it was exposed because of this case. And then I think prosecutors can then, on cross-examination, lead him and direct all the questions exactly where they want to try to clean it up. The question they have to answer in their closing argument is why didn't you call him? And if I were Hank Brennan, I would say, ladies and gentlemen, you heard his testimony. I mean, nothing he said helped me prove the case. I brought in the people who collected the evidence. I brought in the experts. I brought in this person who proved this, this, and this. I didn't need him to prove the case. So I don't know if either way, he's got to deal with a liability, right? It's which is the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but he became like the focus of that first trial. Like, he was all we were talking about. He's been talked about in the courtroom, but we're talking a lot more now about cell phone, Apple Health, text stream, clock drifting. I mean, all this stuff. And that's where Hank Brennan wanted us focused. So, it's a strategic call by him. But
of course it is.
Once you bring Proctor in the mix, then it becomes a lot about Proctor.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of unavoidable. And I don't know whether the defense will be allowed to, make him hostile, and the defense even calling him will be allowed to ask cross-examination questions. I guess we'll see, but
yeah,
I'm not sure if it matters much one way or the other.
I always want to hear it, because I haven't heard it that many times in my years at CourtTV.
Want to declare him hostile witness?
I would like this witness declared as a hostile witness.
Yeah, well, I think Proctor might be a little hostile. I think that's definitely possible.
Yeah.
And if he comes off as hostile, so it's like, as the defense, I don't think I can lose. If he gives me all the confession answers, I win. If he comes off as hostile and recalcitrant and fights me, I win. It's just nothing but rainbows for me. I win with every single answer. It's great.
Yeah, and I it's again the lesser of two evils, and we'll see. I mean, it's a dramatic moment. It's a dramatic moment. Imagine you have the case, and obviously Karen Reed, I doubt she's going to testify, and Michael Proctor not testifying. So you have two of the most important witnesses in the case not testifying. That's crazy.
Yeah,
our system, though.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about CourtTV also in comparison to independent channels such as yours truly. CourtTV, I think, arguably pioneered gavel-to-gavel broadcasting. I think you've certainly done the most in facilitating that. What do you think distinguishes CourtTV from other, let's say, first let's focus on your mainstream traditional media competitors. How does your editorial approach differ from your mainstream traditional competitors, and why does it differ? What are the reasons for those differences?
Right. I don't think we have any competitors. Nobody does what we do they?
I don't know. Maybe the answer is that you have no competitors and you stand alone.
None. We don't. There's no one on like we're on television, so we're a television network. We have obviously a digital footprint like everybody else, but we're our bread and butter is being a television network. So there's no other network that dedicates itself to live trial coverage, period. Sometimes, Fox, CNN might dip in. Sometimes the locals, like in the Karen Reed case, some of the locals are carrying the coverage on their channels, which is a smart move because you're going to get huge numbers. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was one local in the case. I go back to Casey Anthony. I hate saying her name, but in the Casey Anthony trial, there was one local channel that decided to put the trial on, right? Because they're like, they're stuck in their mode like this. Monster numbers. They had monster numbers. They were destroying everyone because everyone was interested in the case. Karen Reed is like that up in Massachusetts, so it's gotten to that point. But we really don't have anyone that does what we do.
How do you compare to Law and Crime?
Law and Crime's not a television network. They're
Great. Be that as it may, I think at least, well, be that as it may, let's switch, I guess, from traditional media to the
for what they do. For the live streaming of trials, they're YouTube. They live stream their trials. So their channel, their channel, which started out trying to do what we do, they pivoted because it's a heavy lift. It's a heavy lift to do what we do. You need a staff, you need people, and that's overhead. We have a great parent company that has tons of resources. EW Scripps owns 40 local stations around the country. They own ION. I mean, we've got huge television roots behind us that are supporting everything that we do. So that's one part of it. They do, they're on YouTube and they're live streaming. Many times they're picking up the feed that we're providing to everyone, because in the big cases, it's CourtTV cameras that are in the courtroom.
Yes, it is.
So that's what once you go in there, but you have to let everybody else who shows up take that stream, which is fine. What I found in comparing us to whether it's Law and Crime or anyone else in the true crime space, we're the only ones doing the live stuff on television during the day. So it's a combination. The difference between us and the folks doing it on YouTube, the live streaming, is twofold. One, we bounce around from trial to trial when we're in normal mode. If we have a big trial, we'll stay in that. But we have our experts and we do background stories. We get interviews. We bring in the parties. We bring it in a much more traditional coverage, and we try to provide a level of analysis and depth that you can't get straight from a live stream. We also try to present it in a way that if someone misses a day or misses a few days or misses a few hours during the day, by watching, we will always kind of keep you up to date as to what is happening, and why what is happening is important. So that's one difference. Now, there are other networks that are in the world of true crime. Discovery ID, which was really built by a guy who built the modern CourtTV years ago, Henry Schleif. He's retired since, but Discovery ID was built by the guy who started building networks at CourtTV. So at night, I'm the only person on television who does 2 hours of live true crime every night. Ashley Banfield, News Nation dips in, but they do a lot of politics. I don't do any politics. This is like politic-free zone. And the closest we come to politics was like showing what's her name, Fonnie down in Atlanta.
Wills?
Yeah, Fonnie Wills on the stand. Like, that's the closest. But it's courtroom. It's courtroom drama.
Of course.
So nobody else is doing what we do. We have a very specific focus. So I don't feel like we have competitors. And I actually like it when everyone else is talking about the stories and the trials that we're covering, because it just garners more interest, and people know when they're flicking their television or their streaming service, if they want to watch it, they can always catch the big trial on CourtTV.
So at the risk to the blow to my own ego, do the really small independents like myself and other of the law YouTubers, does CourtTV take notice of us, or are we doing a Mad Men where, I don't even think of you guys at all? And to the extent you do think of us, how does that influence your broadcast or whatever?
Yeah, no, we love the community. I love it. I think we love it too. And I speak with our digital team all the time. We know about everyone who's covering trials and doing the analysis. The folks who are streaming the trials now as well and doing the analysis. I mean, those are long days for some of these folks. 8 hours of streaming the trial and talking. Yeah. I mean, that's nuts. That'll be like me hosting CourtTV all day long.
You got to get into it, man. You got to do the hardcore thing. Feed it into our veins.
Exactly. But no, I think it's great. The more people that are doing it and watching it and are interested in it, more people will be watching from different places. And
what do you think what do you think the more independent channels like myself, what do you think we're getting wrong? What do you think we're not doing that we should be doing?
Nothing.
Anything?
No. What I think, well, it depends which ones you're talking about. Like there's some that will say, Court TV, they have an agenda. They're doing this and that, and this is what they're really doing. Like there's some that believe. Here's the one thing they're doing wrong. Okay, there's one thing is that they believe that this is a competition and that you're going to steal viewers from each other. You can't watch Court TV. You can't trust everyone. That's not the way this works. Like I've been in television for a long time. And what I know is the more YouTubers and networks and morning shows that are covering a story means more viewers for everyone. Am I being clear?
No, yeah, rising tide rises all boats. I get it.
All boats go up. And all the YouTubers are in this fierce competition with one another, and a bunch of them hate each other for no reason and spend a lot of time on their own channels criticizing the other people, trying to turn this into something when you should all really be coordinating with one another about what should we be covering next. Because if everyone covers the same thing, then the true crime audience is now aware of this, because there's tons of interesting cases and trials that never get the sunlight, because when we don't have a big one like this, everyone splinters off, and Uncivil is covering this, and blah 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 is covering another one, someone else is covering another one, and the audience doesn't know what's the big case. If everyone kind of said, you know what, this au pair case in Virginia, and I don't even know, do you know about this one?
What's that?
The au pair case in Virginia?
I think I vaguely, it's triggering something in the back of my mind.
This is an unbelievable story on many levels. I mean, first of all, it's an au pair love triangle, but the mastermind of the whole thing was an IRS agent, an armed IRS agent.
All right.
But that's a story that if everyone talked about at the same time would be the biggest story ever. But it doesn't get the oxygen because for whatever reason, certain stories take off. We know about this one, why it took off.
We need to borrow your production department. That's what this is rolling down to. Court TV's production department can just start handing out assignments to us guys, and we'll just start taking it as what would be the term for it? Freelancers.
Freelance. But you know who does help this, and this is why another reason why the retrial of Karen Read is bigger than the original trial, and it is the streaming services when they do a documentary. Mm-hmm. And there was the Discovery ID documentary, which ended up on HBO, I think HBO Max or wherever it ended up. In Murdaugh, there were 2 of them or 3 of them before the trial. So if you have a series on Netflix, on Hulu, mm-hmm. or Max or wherever it is, before the trial starts, boom, the audience knows about it, and all of a sudden everyone's talking about it. It's amazing, because then that's when the true crime community sort of comes together around a story. And it happened in this one. Like, I remember I went to, I was at Crime Con, and I bumped into, I think it was Kathy from Law and Crime. And I said, "Are you guys covering Karen Read?" And she said, "What are you talking about?" Like, never
missed that memo. If you missed the Karen Read memo, I don't know, man.
No, but this is before the first, it's way before the first trial. It's way before the first trial.
Okay.
But I had an eye on it because I saw what Turtle Boy was doing, and I had Turtle Boy on my show, and I'm like, there's something going on here that is way different than any other case, and now the allegations by the defense. Then I had Alan Jackson and Yannetti on my show, and they're talking to me about Haas Long, and mm-hmm. I'm like, wow.
I still want to know the answer to that question. Haas Long, indeed. No one tells me.
No. But like, this was an amazing story. And I said, you guys, and I'm not in competition with them. I said, you guys need to cover this. This story is unreal. The public needs to see this. And then the public did. And we've seen the reaction to all of this. And again, it's like the disinfectant. And because of this case, you had Sandra Birchmore. They took a closer mm-hmm. look at that. Yeah. And you're finally getting some justice for her. Now, I'm not saying what happened here in the Karen Read case, but what I'm saying is people paying attention, shining a light on the government, which is really our job in the media anyway, uncovered this.
The Fourth Estate?
Yeah, exactly. Which we sort of forget about from time to time.
Yeah.
But it uncovered the Birchmore case. And now finally some justice for that family and for that victim is going to happen. So It's important. So, I think that's the only thing that the YouTube community does wrong, is that they are way too competitive with each other and don't understand that if they all got along, or they don't even get along, but if they all had said, hey, you know what? This case, have you guys heard about this case? And, oh yeah. And then everyone's competitive, and they think if they're the only ones talking about the case that they're going to get more viewers. They're not. They're not. They never will. They'll get more whenever, like Turtle Boy, when he was the only one talking about this, he was doing well. How much better is Turtle Boy doing now? Yeah. Now that everyone is talking about this case, like, and to me, yes, it comes, viewers, ratings, blah, blah, blah. But to me, the bottom line is the exposure of these stories, the exposure of potential injustices or justice. And at the end of the day, a society that gets some understanding and interest in our system of justice, which I've been involved with my entire professional career, from being a lawyer to being on television to being the lead anchor of CourtTV. And I just want more people watching, more people interested. Yeah, for some selfish reasons, but at the end of the day, I want my work to mean something and make some level of difference. And I think if you let the system just go and leave it alone, the judges and everyone else will try to keep everyone out. We just do our little jobs. And if you just give me another minute here, there was a moment that when I was a prosecutor that made me think about this whole concept. And it was every Friday was sentencing day. And I remember on those sentencing days, every sentencing they spoke, and these weren't like murder cases. These are just like, breaking and entering, assault cases, those types of cases. All we heard inside the courtroom was how great the defendant was. And in a lot of these cases, the victim didn't want anything to do with it. I would have to speak for the victim, but you couldn't really speak for the victim. And then the judges on the bench would do anything and everything to not punish a criminal for their crime. Mm-hmm. And I was like, and I thought to myself, if the people in this community came in here and saw what really happened, they would not be happy with this. They would not be happy with these sob stories for all these criminals. And these are guys, rap sheets that were longer than you could ever see. And I'm like, no, and all these judges are like, oh yeah, we'll give you a chance. It's like his 10th chance. But the reality that I learned very quickly as a young prosecutor was it takes a lot to send someone to prison. They get a lot of chances. And I'm not talking about murder cases. I'm talking about, the regular day-to-day crimes, stealing stuff, assaulting people, breaking into cars, breaking into homes, things like that. People just don't go to prison. It takes forever. And then they come on the violation of probation and they're still begging for another chance, and they get it. And they get it.
You don't have to tell me. I mean, we see examples like that from court feeds where someone's on their 23rd, whatever, and it's like, oh, you better, this time. It can be incredibly frustrating for a lot of people and trying to figure out what it is.
These weren't questionable cases. These were guys with rap sheets that, they had, 10 priors, and they're still like, judge, if you could just get one more chance, he just needs, okay. And the judge does it time and time again. I understand I was a young prosecutor. I was probably being out-lawyered by the defense attorneys. I get it. I accept that. But at the end of the day, my goodness.
Well, I feel like at that point, it kind of speaks for itself, Vinny. I mean, if you're coming in with a rap sheet, it's like, you don't need me. Just look at the transcript,
Exactly.
So what do you think networks such as yourself can learn from the independent creators going the other way around? What are we teaching you?
A lot. And I'm seeing a little less of it now. So the YouTubers who are going to the scenes, a child is missing, crime has just happened, and the YouTubers jumping in an airplane, jumping in a car, and on the ground, and just breaking out, whether it's their cell phone or their camera, and they're talking to people, and they're working the case. and uncovering information. And I know a lot of law enforcement is like, oh, we don't want these people around.
Sometimes they get charged with witness intimidation, Vinny.
Yeah. No, but when these people come around, when we have a missing child or you know, a case like that, they keep the pressure on law enforcement to actually follow up and do their jobs. And they, oh, stop. Well, these rumors are no. Any attention on a missing person, especially, or an unsolved murder case, keeps the pressure on law enforcement, and they've got to do their jobs, because it's very easy for cases to go very cold very quickly, and that's a problem. And you know, they try to fight it and everything else. And I think that's one thing that a lot of the true crime YouTubers are doing very well, which is going to the scenes, talking to people, getting people to talk, and keeping a story in the spotlight, so there's a chance for a better result. Because if there's no attention on a story, it dies. Local news can only do so much. Local news will be there day one. Day two, they're not going to be there. And what are they giving you? They're giving you, you know, a minute 10 on the first day. Then they'll give you 20 seconds the second day. And then once a year, they'll do the anniversary. And that's it. But the true crime community can make a difference, and it has. And when I say true crime, I mean the true crime community and the podcasting community as well.
Sure.
So it's the YouTube live streamers, the YouTubers are posting videos, and the folks are putting together these investigative type of podcasts. I think it all has some level of impact.
Let's talk a little bit about true crime, particularly podcasts, because I noted that true crime podcasts are huge. 120 million Americans apparently are listening to some sort of true crime podcast. That is up sharply, even in the last 5 years. Yeah. How has that boom relating to true crime as a genre impacted your channel, and how's it raised the bar for your work that you do?
Yeah, I think twofold. One, it has raised awareness and interest in the genre. It has created another way to reach people, right? Again, we talked earlier about the splintered audience. People consume their media in different ways at different times. And there are people that, you know, on their commute, or while they're at the gym, or while they're at home, you know, doing chores, are listening to podcasts, to me, which is great. That is great. For us at CourtTV, you know, we've dipped our toe into the podcast world. We've done some in different forums. We haven't done, you know, the up and vanish type of podcast. I think those are great. Those type. What we've done is we did an in-depth one a few years ago on the Menendez brothers case,
which is still in the news, amazingly,
and it's still in the news. And then we do some that are more about current events, which, you know, aren't those what I call the real traditional true crime podcasts. So, you know, we've entered that space to a certain extent to try to reach some of the people who are consuming their media that way. And I think for me on my show, it's opened up a door to stories that I want to cover that may be huge in the podcast world. I'm like, we need to cover this story. And it's also opened up the door to a whole new bunch of potential guests to have on my show. People who have taken the deep dive into these stories and know the facts inside and out, have spoken to people directly related to the case. Because, you know, for them and the way that they create their relationships and get their information, it's not like, hey, okay, I'm calling you, I need that right now. It's a process. And they embed themselves into the stories, and they're able to get and reach people and have people reach out to them differently than a network like CourtTV can. So sometimes the reach of the podcaster is different, and the YouTuber as well. The reach there is different as well. Sometimes people feel much more comfortable coming on with a guy like you who they watch, you know, streaming, you know, every day, and they feel like they know you, and okay, I get this guy, and maybe they go in your chat room for a little bit, and then maybe they want to be on your show. Like, and that's it's a different way to reach the people and get the information. So that's all great. And I think that's something that we we acknowledge and it's happening, and have tried to incorporate into our shows and the way we cover these stories.
Very, very cool. And one question I was interested in, I was trying to figure out how to phrase this, but my question basically boils down to the journalism ethics and how journalism, like at every like level of this, not only like you as professionals or broadcast, because you have your standards and practices and lawyers and everyone who's vetting this in a lot of different ways, but what are the ethical considerations of how podcasters and media at sort of every level, how we cover stories in terms of, are we potentially re-victimizing people by covering it? Are we potentially reopening wounds? Are we potentially changing the story in some ways by covering it? Are we, what are the ethical considerations that you see, and how do we sort of how do you view the balance of ethics and responsible journalism? Or do you think that idea of balance itself is in some sense illusory?
Right. I get what you're saying. And I think there's a couple of different ways to approach this. The first one would just be from a straight legal one, right? Legal ethics. And when you work at a network like CourtTV, you have a whole division of standards and practices. So there's, videos that we can or can't put on, things that we're a broadcast network, so we have limitations there as well. So there's more of a filter for what we can put on the air versus the wild, wild west of YouTube, right? If it's a one-man or one-woman show or a small team that doesn't have a huge corporation with deep pockets behind it and a system that is set up, it's different. Like, we have to be very careful, not just about what we say, but what our guests say on the air.
Sure.
Because it's all, the biggest concern for
defamation
are defamation cases.
Yeah.
Right. You have to be real careful about that. You can't accuse someone of a crime. When you're covering a trial, you talk about what they're accusing each other of in the context of the trial, which is fair game. But just coming out and saying, you're a killer. Okay, well, YouTube, they do it a little bit more. I don't think, like, YouTube itself, if YouTube itself or Facebook itself could be sued, there would be a lot of defamation suits as a result of what is said on a lot of true crime.
God bless CDA 230, right?
Right. So
for that matter, it even protects me because I'm not liable for my own chat. So
right.
Hey, it protects. It's good for a lot of levels.
Exactly. But a lot of people won't take the time to go after a single YouTuber to sue them for defamation.
Right.
You're really going to have to cross a line, but they will go after a big corporation because they know, a lawyer knows who's in that world, knows, okay, I can get them to pay. Whether or not you can get an individual to pay is difficult because you got to get the judgment and then you got to collect the judgment. And it's for someone who's in that world,
collect what? It's like, I don't have a lot to collect over here. Yeah,
but it's a different world. But you can always collect against a huge corporation. So that's why I think ethically we have a different standard on what we can report, when we can report it, and under what limitations.
Let me ask you the question this way, and you can be specific or general as you please. Is there things that you see in the more independent space that make you cringe from an ethics perspective? Just from your own sense of right and wrong, putting aside legalities.
I think so, because the test I use and what I talk to the folks who help produce our show is, if we're ever doing a segment, or because we look at issues and segments and people and things, if at any point we stop and say, should we do that? The answer is automatically no. Right? If I have to stop for a moment and say, should I really put that piece of video on the screen, or should I talk about what happened between this man and this woman? If I have to hesitate for a second, my own personal filter is, if we pause for a second, we don't do it. Because if we're pausing for a second, then it's in that area where it's like a little ick feeling, like, I don't think I feel right doing that. All right. YouTube, obviously, there are times where people will cross that line all the time, all the time. I don't think they necessarily all of them have that same feeling.
Well, they're definitely not going to draw it in the same place. I think that's obvious.
Yeah. So, and you know, I've been doing this for a long time, and I was bred on television and doing it for big companies that have standards and practices and everything else. So all that has an influence on it, but also just individually, we all look at each other. And usually there's one person on every staff, and I've always had one, who will be the first one to say, hey, because I'm pretty aggressive in some of the stuff I've done on television. Like, we've been very aggressive, what I've done on CourtTV, on HLN, and in other places. You know, some might say, wow, I can't believe you did that. But usually there's one person on the staff, and I've had segments that I was ready to go on, and then I look around the room and someone's like, okay, put the brakes on it, because you're just trying to, my goal every day is, when I'm doing a television show, is to have moments during that show that will make people stop and notice and think. And then when the show is over, remember it. And that gets done in different ways. And sometimes I may have an idea, or someone else has an idea that, no, that's not good. That's not a good idea. You shouldn't do that. Right. So we don't do it. And I've been pretty fortunate through the years that I don't think we've crossed that line too many times to do something that in retrospect we shouldn't have done. But, you know, and covering the type of cases we cover all the time, I understand that at the end of the day, there is someone, we are seeking justice. And I always come back to justice. Justice is the truth, right? Justice is the truth. And how do we get to the truth? And that I think is, when people ask me, you know, what do you want in this case? I say, I want justice. And they're like, oh, I said, the truth. I just want the truth to come out. I want the jury to be able to figure it out.
So what do you think the truth is?
In which case?
If Karen Reed, what do you think the truth is?
I don't know. I don't know. I want to hear the first trial. I don't believe either side proved what they alleged, right? Whether it's alleged in the indictment or alleged on the steps of the courtroom, I don't think either side did.
Do you think on some level she was actively framed? Do you think
I haven't seen evidence of the framing? I haven't seen anything that would convince me. But I have to put a caveat to that is, it's difficult to prove that, because the way the case was investigated, you're trying to prove something that was never investigated. So how do you prove that? It's almost impossible for the defense to do that, to prove what they're alleging, because no one went into the 34 Fairview. None of the people were interviewed. There weren't cell phone extractions from all these different people. You don't have the information, and they attempted to get some of it and were denied. So they have a serious handicap, but at the same point, they don't have a burden. So they don't have to prove anything. And that, again, turns it back into the way our system works, which is the reasonable doubt standard, which is prosecutors have to prove it, and they've got to prove it to that level. And that's what it ends up being about.
Yeah. I mean, I preach this, and for me, like, the easiest way to resolve this is I just find it very incredible, in the literal sense of the word incredible, that a 7,000-pound car going 20 miles an hour can hit a guy with enough force to disable him, but simultaneously not create broken bones, torn ligaments, or bruising. It's like, how are both those things plausible in the same universe? And it's like, I don't really see it, and they certainly haven't provided any medical experts to tell me that that's plausible. And so I'm like, well, I don't really find the actus reus, as the lawyers would say, because I'm not sure it happened, and assuming it did, I don't find causality, because, you know, you can't prove to me it caused the injury. So take your pick. That's the easiest way for me to resolve it.
Well, you know what would be really interesting? I think the only way you could prove the conspiracy is if Karen Reed filed a lawsuit.
She may well do at the end of this thing. On
If
a 1983
filed a lawsuit, then she's going to be able to depose people. They can attempt to stop it, but they're going to have a much more difficult time if she is filing a civil lawsuit saying that she was, you know, wrongfully prosecuted, framed, all that other stuff. That's where it could come out. Now, there's a civil suit for wrongful death, and maybe the two I don't know if those two would necessarily merge into one case.
I don't think so.
I don't think so because it's different.
Different causes of action, one state and one's federal at that too.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really work.
So if you had, these competing civil cases going afterwards, that might get you closer to the truth because people would have to be deposed. You'd have a much better opportunity to get certain information that the defense was denied here at this trial. But the truth of this case, I still want to hear the experts. I thought ARCA did a much better job last time, but they were basing it upon limited information. So there's more data available. Will that make their opinion stronger or weaker? And what, if anything, right? What, if anything, will the prosecution...
If I ever become a judge, we're going to have a swear jar. I swear. You say, what, if anything, you're putting money in the jar. I'm banning it. Absolutely not. It drives me crazy every time. It's like, I'm willing to sacrifice foundations so I don't have to hear this question. Well, that's fine.
Exactly.
I want to also ask you about, because CourtTV, as you point out, is typically the ones that are in the courtroom actually physically filming these things. So I want to ask the technical logistic question. What are the challenges in actually doing that technically and logistically that perhaps we wouldn't expect? And also, is there anything you can do to fix the audio? We'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think, no, the audio is what it is.
Can you do some post-processing or something, please? We beg you.
No. See, everyone talks about cameras in the courtroom, but you've pointed out something that's 1000%. Usually the most important thing is the audio. The audio is if I had a choice between good video,
of course,
good
audio, 100%, right? Every YouTube thing that tells you how to get started, they're like, potato cam is preferable to bad audio.
Yeah.
Fix your audio first. Yeah, 100%.
Exactly.
I don't know what you guys need to do in terms of that. Run it through a post-processing, get some AI involved. I don't know, man, but help me.
I think I think in this case are we taking the feed from the court audio?
I'm sure.
I think we are. What the good news is, a lot of courtrooms now have better built-in systems in terms of audio that we can plug into, which is great. Back in the old days, we used to put wireless lav mics on the attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
And so wherever they were, we could hear them, and they trusted us not to listen to their whispering back and forth. And we were great about it. We had, an audio person in the courtroom. That was his only job, was doing the mixing on the audio, and he would pot down and he'd pot up and do it live. And it was great. We're getting a little more limitations in a lot of courtrooms. They don't want us putting microphones everywhere. We've got microphones. So then we get stuck with what they have. Some are good, some aren't good. Some are good when they're next to the microphone, but they're not good when they walk away from the microphone.
Well, to be fair to some of the judges out there, whether intentionally or not, and whether it's CourtTV or not, we have seen cameras do things that are sketchy at times. For example, zooming in on the defendant, particularly as they're speaking to their counsel, trying to zoom in on that mysterious document that's being handed from the defendant to the defense lawyer, and so forth, and occasionally showing jurors. So I think some judges are reluctant because of those reasons.
Well, what's happened is, and this happens, in some cases where our cameras aren't in there, you get local news that goes into a courtroom.
Yep.
You've got a 25-year-old kid working the camera who's never been in a courtroom before and is oblivious to what the rules are or what's right, what's wrong. And he's just covering, or she's just covering, an event inside a courtroom.
Just make them read the Shepard case. Don't do this.
Yeah. And that's why CourtTV lobbies in the big cases to be the cameras inside the courtroom. So, we can control it. And we have a great history of controlling it. And every judge is in charge of his or her courtroom, and we abide by their restrictions. But the ones who are more open to allowing us to do what we want to do generally have better results, with allowing us to place cameras where we want. Some of the best coverage we've had with no problems, there were times where we were able to mount a camera behind the jury. So from that vantage point, you see what the jury sees, but you never see the jury.
Sweet.
It was amazing. So, it all depends on what the judge is going to allow. And some judges don't want to talk to anyone from CourtTV. They have their their clerk do it, or a PIO do it, or some technical person do it. Again, where we've had the best results, like in the George Floyd, Derek Chauvin trial, the judge that was the first time there were ever cameras in Minnesota. They made an exception because they knew of the public service and the importance of that trial. So they made an exception and allowed us in, and the judge was with us all the way. And after the trial, the judge, who was skeptical in the beginning, understood how it worked. And he said, "Oh, okay, I get it." The first question every judge has is, or a court, where are you going to put all the lights? No, we're not bringing in any lights. We're not going to be hitting you with makeup, during sidebars. We just have a camera, and it just shows what people would see if they got in their car and drove to the courthouse.
Yeah, and talking about reluctant judges, I think we could switch briefly into the federal system, which of course is notorious as it continues. As a notable trial is currently going underway in New York that some people might want to cover, although I even if you could cover it, might present again ethical and technical challenges with relation to the nature of what they're talking about. That would be a very interesting. Although I'm assuming you've covered sensitive cases before. So where do you think the federal, particularly federal trial courts, are going with respect to cameras and media? Do you think that's changing anytime? No, you're shaking your head.
No,
not happening.
Justice Roberts was supposed to be it's all in the hands of the Chief Justice, right? So
yeah,
Roberts controls it. Yeah, Roberts controls it. He won't even let him into cameras into the Supreme Court where there are no witnesses.
That part doesn't bother me as much because, it's just a appellate argument and you get live audio. What the cameras are much more valuable in trial.
Principle. It's the principle.
It's the principle thing. Fair enough.
Because usually the argument about cameras is, well, you've got witnesses that are coming in. You could show the jury, blah, blah, blah. In a Supreme Court argument, all you have are lawyers and justices who work for us, right? Justices who work for us, part of the government. They weren't anointed. My father reminded me all the time, he wasn't anointed by God to the federal bench. They were placed there through a political process, okay? And there's no witnesses. There's nothing but lawyers making legal arguments on some of the most important issues in our nation. And Chief Justice won't allow cameras in for that, right? There was a federal judge, this was years ago, when there was a case involving Barry Bonds. And I don't remember what the issue was in the case, but it was a Barry Bonds in federal court. The judge, the lawyers all wanted cameras in there. And the Supreme Court denied the federal district court judge to allow cameras into his own courtroom. So it's all up to Chief Justice Roberts. I don't know. I'd like to talk to him someday about it. But
give him a call. You got to go to Scott Must Be Doll, right?
Give him a call.
Just text him. Hey, what's up? John.
But I think we're entitled to see what happens in federal courtrooms.
Yeah. Did you have any particular reaction to the Aperture witnesses, particularly Shannon, with the fake BS degree and Aperture and all that good stuff? I reached out personally to the University of Alabama for comment. They said no thanks. So how did you react to all that?
I think he was being a little too cute. I think he was being too
little.
Yeah, about his someone from the office sent it, or here is the question though that wasn't asked, and I'm wondering if you would have asked this question, which is when he said, in the redirect, and I thought Brendan did as good as he could do on the redirect, and said, well, in your CV that you provided to the court and to defense, it says pursuing. Right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Why not ask him? All right, what classes are you taking this semester?
What was the last class you took? That would be the question I want to know.
What are you taking this semester? Oh, you're not taking any this semester. So how are you pursuing this? I mean, I would have gone down that road, but it wasn't.
I may have updated my LinkedIn to say that I was president of the University of Alabama pursuing. Yeah. So I may have done that.
And that's what I said on my show the other night. I said, pursuing.
While I'm at it, I'll just put CourtTV lead presenter pursuing while I'm at it too.
I'm pursuing my medical degree at Yale right now too. Like, come on. It's silly.
So many pursuits. The life is nothing but pursuits. It's great. Yeah, I think that the state probably rested today. I mean, they didn't say it, but the tenor, the flow, the fact that they canceled the court on Thursday, it seems like the Commonwealth basically. I'm expecting them to come in first thing now Tuesday and say
Yeah.
we rested. So I think prosecution's case is over.
Yeah. And the defense case is not going to be long.
I don't know. I think it'll be like at least a good week and a half. I think they're going to bring a lot of witnesses on.
Let me tell you, in all my years at CourtTV, we always hear, oh, the defense case is going to be, 8 days, and then it ends up being 3 days. It's always much shorter than every estimate that is made. It's never longer. It's always shorter, and it's usually much, much shorter. So, I mean, they could be done in just a few days. Just a few days, unless there's some witness that ends up lingering on the stand, which could be the ACA. ACA is ACA.
Yeah. Well, they're going to call Proctor. They might call Higgins. They might call Brian Albert. They might call some of these witnesses that the prosecution didn't call.
They might not. Also, like they may not. They may sometimes defense attorneys like to leave the boogeyman just laying out there, like we've heard all about this person. And ladies and gentlemen,
fair point. That's fair point.
Never came in this courtroom. Why is that?
Well, you can't make that argument. You know that. You have to make it softer than that. Yeah. But it'll be interesting to see what's going on. I mean, I think that's probably what's happening. But they're going to spend. I think the defense thinks based on what they did first time that they didn't spend enough time in their case, and I think they're going to spend more time. But I guess we'll see whether or not who's right in the end. I think it will also be really interesting, and when the judge asks them for the jury instructions. So, defense team, do you want complete verdicts or do you want partial verdicts? Which one do you want? I don't think the defense is going to say we want partial verdicts. I don't think they're going to say it. But the judge is going to ask. It's like, we'll do it either way. You pick. Complete, partial, right? Pull a Judge Judy back from way back in the day. Speaking of, Judge Scheindlin, when she was still Judge Scheindlin, opening up the cameras to her juvenile courtroom, and that was a lot of how she made her start. So, it worked out pretty well for her.
It did. But no more cameras in New York, by the way.
I noticed, which is interesting. What's that all about?
The cameras, it was a provision by the legislature, but it had a sunset part of it. So once the time period lapsed, then there were no more cameras. CourtTV for years ago lobbied to get cameras back in New York because there's so many great cases.
Get Judge Judy, man. She should be advocating for this. Where's she at?
I know, but no, they're not going to do it. They never did it, and I don't think they ever will. So New York is one of those states where there's no cameras. Texas and California, two states where you get a lot of cases. It's in the
one of my judges, what's his name in Houston? He's pretty popular. Fletcher, I believe his name, Fleischer. He's down in Texas. I've actually been in his courtroom before. He has, it's just a Zoom camera, but he's making a lot of the high right rules these days. So people like him. I think they like him because he's really hard on both sides. He is one of the few judges the prosecution comes in with probable cause, and he routinely is like, no. He's interesting. But in Texas and California, it's up to the judge. There's no presumption one way or other. But you go to states like Massachusetts and Florida, the presumption is that it's open to cameras. There has to be a compelling reason to keep us out. And what we do in sensitive situations like we did here, if there's a juvenile testifying, you won't see them. If there's a victim of sexual assault, unless they want to be on television, basically the cameras are off them as well. So there's ways to work around certain sensitive situations, but for the most part, like, we should be able to see what's happening in our court. You just need to get someone with a Bluetooth enabled typing machine, stenograph machine, and just live stream the transcript. That'll be good. Maybe get some actors playing the parts or something. That'll be.
You don't have to.
That's a brand new opportunity for you, CourtTV. Yeah. You just stage it yourself. You get the people, and they just read the lines. It'll be fantastic, man.
Or AI.
That's true. That too.
Have you seen?
But nothing beats live theater.
Yeah, but have you seen Law and Crime is AIing parts of the Diddy trial?
I have not.
Oh, it's interesting. It's interesting. I think it's fascinating, right? Because it's federal court. What if we start AIing the Supreme Court? How will Chief Justice Roberts respond to that?
Well, I mean, that would be relatively easy to AI because they're relatively static. I mean, I've been there multiple times in the room. So I mean, AIing
do
that
that
would be
just
pretty
to
easy.
Force them to say, you can't do. Well, yeah, we can. We're allowed to do that. We can do that if we want. And even there, they release the recordings of the voices, so you don't even have to AI.
Deep fake it, man. Deep fake it. Go for gold, man. I love it.
Yeah.
Deep faking Supreme Court, man. Awesome. I'm sure they'll be thrilled. How do you feel that Zoom has impacted things? Because I personally am big anti-Zoom. If I were judge, I am just banning Zoom. We had court for 1,000 years without Zoom. Show up in court. It's just not the same. Am I alone?
Well, here's the thing. I think for certain appearances, it's fine. And I think it makes things move a little more quickly. And I feel for the lawyers. I feel for that sole practitioner who's got to be in 3 courtrooms the same morning, and 3 judges all believe that their case is the most important. And all of a sudden he can sit in his office or her office and appear in 3 courtrooms with 3 laptops at the same time if they need to. So I think for efficiency, for certain appearances, but I don't think it should be part of jury selection. I don't think it should be part of depositions in civil cases. I don't think you should Zoom a deposition, because who is off camera and what are they doing there? You know what I mean? I think that's.
Did you see that one where they were having some sort of appearance from the criminal, and he was literally in the same apartment as the woman he beat up? Yeah. It's like, wait a second. Are you in the same apartment as this person? It's like, okay, we're going to have a court officer step by. I mean, holy shit. Dude.
Yeah. I think there was a witness in the Johnny Depp. I think it was the Johnny Depp case that was driving.
Was that Johnny Depp?
Cigarette. I think it was either Depp or
it might have been Johnny Depp. There was a couple ones.
Yeah. He's in his car and he's smoking.
I think we've let standards go by. There was a time and a place when people showed up at court in their Sunday best. Yeah. Now we're lucky if they have pants on.
Exactly.
I'm bringing back standards, Vinny.
Yeah.
I'm going old school.
All right. Well, I got to get ready for my show tonight. I got 8 to 10 every night. I am live on CourtTV, and I've got to tighten up a couple things for the show tonight. So
no problem. Why don't you give an outro? Tell people about where they can find you. Tell us about your program and so forth.
Sure. Well, you can find me on CourtTV every night. 8 to 9 is Closing Arguments, where we take a look at the biggest legal stories and trials of the day. And then from 9 to 10, it's Vinnie Politan Investigates, where we take a deep dive into some of the evidence in some of the cases. Right now, we're doing 2 hours of Karen Reed, but the approach is different in the 2 hours, but it's live true crime every night. Even though I'm wearing different clothes during the commercial break between the 8 o'clock show and the 9 o'clock show, I change clothes. So it's still live. And then you can also find me on YouTube when I have time to stream. I'll stream. And my YouTube channel is my name with the number 1, Vinnie Politan, number 1.
Well, if you ever want to have me on your program, you know where
we will,
sir.
We will.
All right. Well,
you're going to wear that hat? Only if you wear the hat.
I will 100% wear the hat. No problem. You got it.
Then we'll do it. Fantastic.
Thank you, sir.
I
appreciate it. All right. Bye-bye. Right. That was our guest, Vinnie Politan. Thank you so much, Vinnie, for dropping by. And I hope you enjoyed that somewhat interesting, at least to me, historical perspective on how courts have been acting historically, how they're acting now, how the public is acting now, and, you know, how ethics view this in true crime. I echo a lot of what he says. One of the advantages, you know, to the way that our sort of disparate aspects of LawTube or true crime is that we sort of make independent decisions, of course, and that at least increases the possibilities that we can focus on different things. Like, for those of you who know my channel, I focus a lot on Supreme Court coverage, which isn't necessarily a big part of a lot of other channels' focus. You know, I try to cover basically every Supreme Court case because I really like the U.S. Supreme Court. I think it's awesome. So, you know, that's one of the interesting aspects of, you know, my channel. And then, of course, other channels have things that they care about. as well. And it's also true, of course, of true crime and podcasts as well. And it's also the fact that there's so many of us out there that the probability of someone finding a big story that can pop because there are so many eyes is big. I think Vinny himself would agree and basically said as much. Basically without Turtle Boy, Karen Reed isn't Karen Reed. This case may very well have just been another case, in the background with Turtle Boy, but because of him and he got some initial interest in it and running on it and all the rest of it. Now we're all following this case, and and it's independent creators that make that possible. Big networks like CourtTV simply do not have the staff. They have money, but they simply do not have the resources in terms of personnel to possibly cover everything that every possible podcast is covering. And you never know when something's going to pop. So, in terms of like coordinating things on LawTube where we hand out assignments or something, I don't think that's probably going to happen. But it would be interesting, and I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to it if it would be interesting if part of my work, I wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't necessarily go so far as Uncivil Law brought to you by CourtTV, but it would be interesting if part of my work were in some sense, assigned, or if there was some sort of bulletin board that CourtTV produced listing things that they thought were interesting or needed more attention. And not for the least of reasons that I think that, podcasts and other creators would then go develop some of those stories. And so there's some potential there for coordination. But in terms of coordination, something like CourtTV or Law and Crime has more resources to provide those kind of coordinated effects. I don't have those abilities, and LawTube as a coordinated aspect. Some of you who know about the history of LawTube, there was a time and a place when LawTube was heading towards a greater coordination, and unfortunately, for a lot of reasons, that did not happen. And I don't think it's probably going to happen again. So, it's going to have to be someone independent who is going to do that if it's going to happen, but I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to it, because like this all pair story he mentioned was not one that I was aware of, and might be something that's worth a look. And maybe it gets some traction and maybe it becomes the next big thing, or maybe it doesn't. But by having 1,000 people stoking 1,000 fires, how do you know what's going to pop? You never know what's going to pop, and why one story does. Even the professionals probably can't tell you why one story pops and one story doesn't. But I really enjoyed his perspective. I really enjoyed his thoughts on cameras in the courtroom, that basically it reveals, it doesn't change, which was obviously a lot of my questions. I think that's partially right, that it reveals, doesn't change. I don't know if it's completely right, but I think it's partially right. I also enjoyed his thoughts on, the fact that, there is something for both independent and corporate media to learn from each other relating to things, in terms of how we cover cases and how we think about things. I really enjoyed our discussion. I hope he did too. I tried to ask questions that were a little bit more deep divey, a little bit more into philosophy and stuff like that, because I figured that would be a better use of our time. So hopefully chat found it interesting. Let me read some of your super chats that came in, and I do appreciate all the people who spent time with us. So let me read the super chats and memberships that came in. The Crafty Councilwoman became an uncivilian. Fallen Hero 4567 became an uncivilian. DL became an uncivilian. Little Misfit became an uncivilian. Kilo 1212 became an uncivilian. Angel P became an uncivilian. Scott Livingston became an uncivilian. Jeannie Ireland became an uncivilian. Tony P gifted 10 gift memberships. Share ID gifted 5 gift memberships. Ashley Bocard, $1.99, said popping into shows some support for the boss man. Jenny X to the 7th power became an uncivilian. Collusion, not collision, nice name, become an uncivilian. The boss lady became an uncivilian. Pin King 554, $2, said like watching the Diddy trial. We talked a little bit about that and how cameras in the Fed courtroom, and yeah, not so much, because under the federal rules, and the Supreme Court is the one that's holding this back. Why they're holding it back, you'd have to ask them. I don't think cameras in the courtroom relating to the Supreme Court are really very particularly valuable. Vinny thinks it's the principle of the thing, which, fair enough. But, from a purely informational standpoint, I don't really think that you're losing very much. I've been in the room. There isn't much to see. It's just people kind of sitting and standing there. It's kind of, it's not very theatrical. So there's not very much to see. You get basically all the information that you need from the audio, which to the Supreme Court's credit, for those of you who are unfamiliar, the Supreme Court didn't used to release the audio until the end of the term. Like 5 years ago, they didn't release the audio till the end of the term. So you wouldn't get any of the audio until June or July, to be more precise. You wouldn't get any of the audio until July. Then a couple of years back, they're like, how about the end of the week? So then they started releasing it every Friday. And then they're like, how about the end of the day? And now they're like, how about simultaneously? They're basically releasing it live, which they didn't, so to the Supreme Court's credit, they have been making it more and more and more available. Whether that's indicative of cameras or anything else, who can say? But yeah, I mean, even in the last 5 years, the Supreme Court has made themselves more open with audio than they used to be. So, and I don't think you're losing very much. With respect to the trials, however, being able to view the witnesses and how they react and judge credibility and all the rest, you're losing a lot more. But for whatever reason, and I could certainly understand the Supreme Court being reluctant to allow cameras in the Supreme Court because like the cost benefit ratio might not be worth it. And they'd be worried about it impacting things. But at the trial level, I'm less understanding what they're concerned of. And to the extent they're concerned about, media, acting roguely, they could just impose on high, certain restrictions relating to, not filming certain things. So if those are those concerns, they can just impose those rules unilaterally, and that would solve part of the problem. But, for whatever reason, they're not doing that. So, who can say? Jin Decker, $5. Hey, Vinny, thanks, Kurt. For Michelle L, $2. Thank you. Jilly Bean, been a member for 25 months. Borders Guild became an uncivilian. Snacks has been a member for 18 months. Kara Shelton gifted 20 gift memberships. Kristen from Manhattan became an uncivilian. Nate the lawyer, my friend and yours, said, wanted to ask about Diddy. Does he think Diddy's getting convicted? The question didn't come up, but thank you for the super chat anyway. Kristen asked for $10, how would you question Barrows, the indicting cop, if you're on defense? How specific would you go? Vinny, my aunt was a Court TV producer back in the 90s. Yeah, sorry. I didn't necessarily get to questions. I had written out a bunch of questions. I didn't get to all my questions. So I would have gone to questions eventually, but, I had to choose what questions to ask in my program. So sorry. Sorry, but not sorry. I hope you understand. Programmer asked me a question that I would definitely not ask because it was asked very aggressively, but he asked, oh, Kurt, please ask why they have such horribly ignorant, biased guests on for Karen Reed. I wasn't going to ask that question, right? I mean, there's no way I'm going to ask a question that hostile, right? So, I mean, come on, man. Amy's positive Pat said, hi, Vinny is the only person I like on Court TV. Share ID gifted 5 gift memberships. Rose has been a member for 34 months. Collusion, not collision, for 5 Swiss francs said, Vinny, why inviting Cal Alberts Lauber and Kevin the paid actor all the time? But thank you for Wayne to mention he knows. Yeah, again, probably wasn't going to ask those questions. I don't want to be hostile to my new friend. I need to build a relationship first before we can start asking those kinds of questions. Because, I'd like to, hopefully have a friendship with him. Whether this is the start of a beautiful friendship, who knows? I hope it is. I hope we can have more discussions in the future. I hope I can appear on his program. I hope he'll appear on my program. Maybe someday I'll become a Court TV presenter. Court TV presenter, currently pending. Could be, ma'am. Could be. And I'm doing more to pursue that by having an interview with Vinny than Burgess is in terms of pursuing his BS. So I can more credibly claim presenter Court TV currently pursuing than Burgess. I've got that going for me. That's nice. My cat's name is Karen, became an uncivilian. B. Blazy became an uncivilian. Jinx said, can we get 1,000 likes? Indeed we can. Thank you, Jinx. Kristen said, Vinny, is Court TV covering the au pair case? VA doesn't normally allow cameras, but the judge is from the Depp case. Yeah, apparently he wants it to be covered. Presumably, he could just do it. I mean, they have their own priorities, but he thinks it's worthy of more coverage. And, they can't cover everything. They only have so many hours in the day, which, fair enough. And so many presenters. But, if they really wanted to pay, if they really wanted to pay like a true crime person to go down there and do stuff, they probably could, although that would impose liability concerns. So, well, one step at a time. Solving Johannes Hammer became an uncivilian. The Glairer for $9.99 said, "Just say it, Vinny. Karen Reed is innocent. Come on, you can do it." Glad to see you, Glairer. Thank you for dropping by. I hope you enjoyed the coverage. And, he was going to be a little bit more reserved than that. I asked him where he thought it was framed, and he didn't think it was proven. Fair enough. And how do you prove it? As to what he thinks, I think he thinks that the state hasn't proven their case. I sort of got that gist from him. I mean, he said that during the first trial, they didn't prove their case, and they don't really have any new evidence in that domain. So, yeah. MoMA 9 became an uncivilian. Ashley Bocard said, "Vin, your mass access is perfect now. Access perfect now." Share ID gifted 5 gift memberships. Judy has been a member for 17 months. Also, on Tuesday, of course, when court resumes with the prosecution's case or the defense case, who will be presenting on Tuesday? Am I right? The prosecution's case is over? I mean, it certainly feels that way to me. If you feel the flow of the prosecution's case, it certainly feels like it was over. The prosecution had been indicating they expected to end this week. There's no trial tomorrow, presumably because there's no more witnesses to call, and the defense wasn't necessarily ready to call a witness. So I think the defense case starts on Tuesday. Now, the prosecutor didn't say, case. They didn't say, they didn't say the magic words of, what's the, I can't even remember the phrase. They didn't say the magic words of, we rest our case. But of course, if I'm the prosecutor and I can avoid saying that until Tuesday morning, I avoid saying it, because once I say it, I can't unsay it, without permission. So if my choice is say it at the end of the day today versus say it first thing Tuesday, I'll say it first thing Tuesday on the off chance that I think of something, right? But it feels to me like the flow of the prosecution's case, it feels like we're done. So I'm expecting them to say, we rest our case and the prosecution and the defense case starts Tuesday. That's my expectation. But of course, we'll see whether or not I'm right in the end. But yeah, we'll see about how that's going on. They do, of course, have 5 days to figure out how to salvage this, assuming that there's some way to salvage this. So they do have the benefit now of spending 5 days trying to dream up additional ways to buttress their case in chief. I don't think they really need to buttress their case in chief to get to where they need to be. I mean, the judge is obviously going to deny a motion for a directed verdict. So there's no particular reason to buttress their case in chief. And anything they could do, they could just shove into their rebuttal case, which might be a more strategically wise thing to do. But if they want to somehow undo some of the pain of aperture, where's my button? Hold on. If they want to undo some of the pain of aperture science, then then they potentially could call somebody. We'll see. Oh yes. Anyways, we'll be back on trial on Tuesday, so make sure to tune in on Uncivil Law on Tuesday. We do merch giveaways. We have really cool merch. We do merch giveaways usually every day. We usually set some threshold, and most days we hit it. We hit it today. Someone won a merch item today. That was exciting. So we do merch giveaways. You could drop by. It'll be fun. We cover the case. We have commentary. We have laughs. We have cries. It's great. Let's see if there's any sort of comments from you guys in terms of things. Yeah, my allergies got to me there at the end. Fortunately, they decided not to attack me while I was talking to Vinny, so my allergies were very courteous to me in that respect. You guys have seen my eye suddenly get inflamed on stream before, so it's not the first time. But it was nice that it's nice that my eye decided not to attack itself while I was on stream with Vinny, so that was plus. You're going to have Debbie Davis on your show Monday, Miss Mandy Rex. That's cool. Zoom is good for transparency in smaller courts. It's just not the same, man. It's just not the same. It's not the same as being in the room. It's just not. But, Thank you, Jen, for saying I asked great questions. I did spend time writing the questions. I didn't want to overly focus on the Karen retrial. I didn't want it to become just like me grilling him about the Karen retrial. I want to ask about broader context of media, independent media, corporate media, big media, small media, interactions of media. I wanted to ask him where he thinks it's going, where it's been since the 1500s, how it's going, so forth and so on. But yeah, those are the questions I wanted to ask, because I thought he'd have a value perspective, being the lead presenter on CourtTV, being a lawyer himself, being in courtrooms both with and without cameras. I thought that he'd have some valuable perspectives. I mean, he's been a presenter for basically 20 years, a little bit longer than that now at this point, so it's like, I thought he'd have some pretty reasonable thoughts on how the media is going, where it's changing, issues of ethics, issues of journalism, so yeah, but thank you. Those are the questions I thought were valuable. So, those are the questions I asked. Collusion said they didn't like the interview. I'm sorry, Collusion, that you didn't like the interview. I'm sorry I let you down. I feel bad. Yeah, I didn't want to grill Vinny. That was definitely not what I was going for. I didn't want to put him off. I wanted to try to, ask something I thought was intelligent. Hopefully he agreed it was intelligent. Oh, they took it back? Okay, cool. I didn't want it to become the same interview he's done before, too. I wanted to try to ask him questions that would be different. I assume that, in his time on media, he's been asked a lot of different questions. So I didn't want it to become, just another rote interview. I want it to be interesting. So I want to ask questions I thought were different. How do you think the state of trials and media has been developing since the 1500s? I think was a pretty unique question for my credit. So I mean, I got that going for me. Man. Yeah, I've watched most of Vinny's interviews. The questions are the same. I was trying to ask different questions. I was trying to ask different questions. Try to make it interesting. You thought his eyes lit up when I was asked the question? I think you found it refreshing. I hope so. Yeah, I mean, that was what value? It's like, from an interview perspective, like, what is his value, right? What is the thing to get from him, right? So that's like, what can he provide me that would be unique in some way, right? So it's like, how can I make these questions that are tailored to him? And so it's like, well, what do I know about him, right? He's been a presenter. He's been a presenter for 20 years. He's big in the media. He knows the media space. I mean, he has to, right? I mean, he's obviously aware of us in some global sense. I mean, you know, the degree to which Court TV spends its time thinking about lowly channels like me, who can say? But even if corporate Court TV doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about us, they're still aware of us in some sort of global sense. It has to be somewhere in the zeitgeist of Court TV's business that all this stuff that's going on with independent media, someone's got to be thinking about it on some level, right? So it's like, okay, well, where do you think the state of media is? Where do you think it is? Where do you think it's going? You know, and that's the questions I thought would be valuable. What can we learn from you? What can you learn from us? And so forth and so on. So yeah, it's like what that seemed to be his value propositions. Like that would be the thing that he would be able to provide the most expertise on. So that's what I went with. Are they going to have the crash reconstructionist guy come on? I don't know. I think that there's a pretty credible case they shift that into their case in chief. Or apologize, I keep saying it backwards. I think there's a pretty credible case they shift the crafts reconstructionist into the rebuttal case, because obviously the defense calls ARCA. I mean, duh, right? So the prosecution knows that the defense is going to call ARCA, because of course they are. So if you are the prosecution, do you call that person now, or do you call them in your rebuttal case? Now, technically, you can do both. You can have your cake and eat it too, although maybe it's less powerful to do it that way. So I think there's a pretty credible case to be made for strategic reasons that they defer calling the crass reconstructionist until their rebuttal case. And they sort of finish with that as sort of their last witness, you know, because they get the last word. They get the last word before the jury. And what word do you want ringing in the jury's mind, right? Because the defense is going to be all about aperture, or apologize, all about ARCA, and this is not possible. This defies the rules of physics, right? You know that's where the defense is going. It defies the rules of physics. So what do you want the last word in the jury's ear to be if you're the prosecution? Right? What do you want the last thing going through their head? Primacy and recency, right? What's the first thing? What is the last thing? These are the twin pillars of, you know, advocacy in a courtroom. So what is the last thing you want ringing through their ears? The last thing I think you probably want ringing through their ears is the guy from Aperture who hopefully is going to come and tell you, no, totes, this is 100% possible. The laws of physics demand it, right? That is the last thing that's literally the last thing you want in the jury's mind. And and you finish with that, right? And so that is, you know, your rebuttal case. So it makes, and you can call them now and call them later, but it makes more sense, I think, arguably, to defer calling them and just wait to call them later. I think it's more powerful, arguably, coming later. So, I mean, that's my thought as a strategic consideration, but, you know, maybe it's just me. If I were Brennan, I would not have called Shannon. That was insane. So, I mean, he's made at least one mistake so far. So there's that. You're going to link this interview on Vinnie's channel? Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. That's very nice. You know, so it's just like trying to guess what makes sense. Nothing in this case for 6 days? Well, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So yeah, I guess. So what will we do with ourselves? Who knows? What will we do? Yeah, you missed the interview. We had a good time though. I'll make it non-members only for a while. I just didn't want to have, you know, a lot of superfluous chat while Vinnie was on, but I'll make it subscribers for a while in case you guys had any thoughts. Chat says I'm wrong. I might be wrong. Chat says I'm wrong about a lot of things. Chat always thinks I'm wrong. Tell me something I don't know, right? All right, I guess I'm going to go ahead and sign off. I'm usually right. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm right. I'm right about legal analysis. I'm right about like what courts will do, but this isn't a legal analysis. This is more tactics and strategy analysis. So I don't necessarily have the greatest track record of all time. All right, I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now, guys. Thanks for joining me. I've been Uncivil Law. Hope to see you on Tuesday. Thanks, and have a good one. Bye.